Jesse Carter lived to be 78 years old, a long and full life that was defined not by a single moment of triumph, but by the steady accumulation of small victories, small kindnesses, and small acts of love that together formed a legacy as enduring as the land itself. She never stopped farming, never stopped tending the community garden, never stopped believing in the power of hope and the strength of community. She had inherited her father's stubbornness, his resilience, his refusal to let the world break her spirit. But she had also grown into her own kind of leader, a woman who listened before she spoke, who led by example rather than by command, who inspired others by showing them what was possible. Under her guidance, the Community Garden became a nonprofit organization that served as a model for sustainable agriculture across the Midwest. The mentorship program expanded, training hundreds of young farmers who went on to start their own farms and communities. The Renewable Energy Co-op became a regional leader, providing clean energy to dozens of towns in the area. The Farm to Table Cafe, now operated by Sam and Maya's daughter, had become a celebrated restaurant that drew food lovers from across the country. And at the heart of it all was the spirit of Ben Carter, the old farmer who had refused to quit, whose memory lived on in every row of crops, every shared meal, every new friendship forged in the fertile soil of community. Jesse had two children, Emma and Lucas, who grew up to be remarkable adults in their own right. Emma became an environmental scientist, specializing in sustainable farming practices, and she returned to Horace to run the community garden after her mother stepped down. She wrote a book about her grandfather's legacy, titled Planting Hope, which became a bestseller and was translated into 6 languages. Lucas became a mechanical engineer, designing new agricultural equipment that made farming more efficient and sustainable. He never forgot the old John Deere tractor he had restored as a teenager, and he kept it in his workshop as a symbol of the family's resilience. Jesse's grandchildren, 5 of them, grew up surrounded by the land and the stories of their great-grandfather. They knew the story of the soybeans, the storm, the second planting, the miracle harvest. They knew about the drought and the rain and the community that had come together to save the garden. They knew that their family was part of something bigger than itself, part of a legacy that stretched back 150 years and would stretch forward for generations to come. And when Jessie passed away, on a warm June evening, just like her father, she was buried beside him under the cottonwood tree. The entire town turned out for her funeral, just as they had for her father, and they stood together in the community garden, sharing stories and memories and tears. Emma spoke for the family, her voice steady and full of love, and she told the crowd what her mother had taught her, that hope was not passive, but active, that it required work, faith, and the support of others, that it was a seed that had to be planted and nurtured and protected. My mother and my grandfather taught me that we are not alone, Emma said. We are part of a community, part of a story that has been written across generations, and it is our job, our honor, our privilege to continue that story, to plant our own seeds of hope, and to trust that they will grow into something beautiful. The crowd applauded, and then they dispersed, not with sadness, but with a quiet, shared determination to carry forward the legacy that Ben and Jesse had built. The community garden continued to thrive. The mentorship program trained new generations of farmers, and the town of Horace became a symbol of resilience and renewal, a testament to what could be accomplished when people refused to give up on each other. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, when the sun was setting over the prairie and the wind was rustling through the soybean leaves, the older residents of Horace would tell the younger ones the story of Ben Carter, the man who had planted soybeans in September, who had refused to quit, who had shown them all what it meant to be a community. The children would listen, their eyes wide with wonder, and they would ask the same question every time. Did it really happen? And the answer would always come, spoken with the same conviction, the same quiet pride, the same unshakable faith. Yes, it did, and it can happen again. All it takes is someone who believes. The fields of Nebraska continued to roll under the big blue sky. The seasons turned, and the Carters, and the community they had built, kept farming, kept planting, kept believing, because that was what America was built on. The stubborn, foolish, beautiful refusal to give up. The faith that the next season would bring something better. The community that made the fight worth fighting. And the story of Ben Carter, like the prairie itself, would endure. A story of hope, a story of redemption, a story that would be told and retold as long as there were farmers who looked up at the sky and dared to hope for rain, as long as there were communities that held together, as long as there were hearts that refused to surrender. The end, or rather the beginning of something that would never truly end. Emma Carter was 32 years old when she officially took over the community garden from her mother, Jessie, and she felt the weight of that inheritance in every bone of her body. She had spent the last decade studying environmental science at the University of Nebraska, working on organic farms in California, and volunteering with sustainable agriculture projects in Central America, but nothing had prepared her for the profound responsibility of stepping into her grandfather's and mother's shoes. The community garden had grown into a sprawling 100-acre operation that supplied fresh produce to 3 counties, supported a staff of 20 full-time employees, and served as a training ground for young farmers from across the country. It was no longer just a garden. It was an institution, a living monument to the stubborn hope that had saved Ben Carter's farm all those years ago. Emma walked the rows of vegetables on her first day as director, her boots crunching on the gravel path, her eyes scanning the fields with a mixture of pride and anxiety. The tomatoes were coming in beautifully, fat and red and fragrant. The corn was tall and green, its stalks rustling in the late summer breeze. The sunflowers, planted along the southern edge as her grandfather had always done, were in full bloom, their golden heads tracking the sun with an almost reverent devotion. She knelt down and touched the soil, feeling its familiar texture, its faint, earthy scent, and she felt a connection to her grandfather that was almost palpable. She could imagine him standing here, a weathered old man in a worn-out hat, his hands calloused and his eyes full of that unyielding fire. She had grown up on his stories, had heard them so many times that they had become part of her own memory, her own identity. The storm, the drought, the miracle harvest, the community that had rallied around him. These were not just tales from the past. They were the foundation upon which her entire life was built. Emma had inherited her grandfather's stubborn streak, a trait that her mother had warned her would be both a blessing and a curse. She was determined to honor his legacy, to protect and expand the community garden, to ensure that it remained a source of sustenance and solidarity for generations to come. But she also had her own ideas, her own vision for the future. She wanted to incorporate regenerative farming practices, to restore the soil's health through composting and rotational grazing. She wanted to expand the educational programs, to reach more schools and more communities. She wanted to build a seed bank, preserving heirloom varieties of vegetables that were at risk of extinction. She wanted to create a farmers' cooperative that would give small-scale farmers a fair price for their produce. It was an ambitious agenda, and Emma knew it would take years to realize. But she also knew that her grandfather had faced far worse odds, and he had never backed down. In the months that followed, Emma threw herself into the work with a passion that surprised even her. She woke before dawn every morning, her coffee mug in hand, her day planner filled with meetings, farm visits, and grant proposals. She worked alongside the staff, planting and weeding and harvesting, earning their respect through sweat and dedication. She organized workshops on soil health and pest management, drawing crowds of farmers who were hungry for knowledge. She reached out to local schools, creating a curriculum that brought students to the garden for hands-on learning experiences. She even started a podcast, Roots and Resilience, in which she interviewed farmers, activists, and community leaders about the future of sustainable agriculture. The podcast gained a loyal following, and Emma found herself becoming a voice for the movement, a bridge between the old wisdom of her grandfather's generation and the new innovations of her own. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Emma faced resistance from some members of the community, particularly the older farmers who were skeptical of her fancy ideas and her college talk. They complained about the new composting systems and the rotational grazing methods, insisting that the old ways were the best ways. Emma listened to their concerns, the way her mother had taught her, and she invited them to the garden, showing them the results of her methods, letting the data speak for itself. She was patient, but she was also firm, and gradually, she began to win them over. The turning point came when the harvest that year broke all records. The community garden produced twice as much as it had the previous year, and the quality of the produce was exceptional. The farmers' cooperative that Emma had helped establish secured contracts with grocery chains in Omaha and Lincoln, bringing in revenue that allowed the garden to expand its programs. The skeptics became supporters, and Emma felt a sense of triumph that was all the sweeter for having been earned through struggle. She walked through the garden on the evening of the harvest festival, her heart full, and she thought about her grandfather. She could almost hear his voice, gruff and tender, saying the words he had always said. "You did good, kid. Real good." And she smiled, because she knew that wherever he was proud of her. The winter following Emma's first year as director brought a challenge that no one had anticipated. A severe blizzard swept across the plains in mid-December, dumping 2 feet of snow and dropping temperatures to 20 degrees below zero. The garden was buried under a white blanket, and the greenhouses, which housed the winter crops and the seedling nursery, were damaged by the weight of the snow and the force of the wind. Emma woke to the news at 5 a.m., her phone buzzing with frantic calls from the staff. She drove through the treacherous conditions, her truck sliding on the icy roads, her heart pounding with fear. When she arrived at the garden, she found a scene of devastation. One of the greenhouses had collapsed entirely, its glass shattered, its precious seedlings frozen and dead. The other 2 were intact but had suffered damage to their heating systems, and the temperature inside was dropping fast. Emma's first instinct was panic, but she forced herself to breathe, to think, to act. She called the staff together, and they gathered in the farmhouse kitchen, their faces pale and worried. "We can save this," Emma said, her voice steady. "It's going to be tough, but we've been through worse. We have generators, we have extra blankets, we have each other. We're going to move the surviving seedlings into the farmhouse, and we're going to fix those greenhouses, piece by piece." The team sprang into action, and for the next 72 hours, they worked around the clock, battling the cold and the fatigue and the despair that threatened to creep in. Emma led by example, working alongside her staff, her hands raw and frozen, her breath visible in the frigid air. They moved hundreds of seedlings into the farmhouse, setting up makeshift grow lights in the living room and the kitchen. They repaired the greenhouses using materials salvaged from the hardware store, reinforcing the frames and replacing the broken glass. They worked in shifts, sleeping in shifts, and by the end of the third day, they had managed to save 70% of the seedlings. It was not a complete victory, but it was enough, and Emma felt a profound gratitude for the people who had rallied around her. She knew that her grandfather would have done the same, would have stood in the cold and the wind and refused to give up. She knew that her mother had done the same during the drought, had gathered the community and fought back against the forces of nature. And she knew that she was part of that legacy, a link in a chain of resilience that stretched back to her great-great-grandfather, who had broken this land with oxen and a plow. The blizzard became a bonding experience for the garden community. The staff who had worked side by side in the freezing conditions became a family, their shared struggle creating a bond that no ordinary workday could have forged. The wider community, too, rallied in support, donating money and materials to help rebuild the greenhouses. The local newspaper ran a story about the rescue effort, and donations poured in from across the state. Emma wrote an article for her podcast, reflecting on the lessons of the blizzard, and it was shared thousands of times, inspiring people who had never set foot in Nebraska, but who recognized the universal truth. That hope was not about avoiding adversity, but about facing it together. By January, the greenhouses were fully repaired, the seedlings were thriving in their new environment, and the garden had emerged from the crisis stronger than ever. Emma stood in the farmhouse kitchen, looking out at the snow-covered fields, and she felt a quiet, steady peace. She had been tested, and she had not broken. She had led her team through the storm, and they had come through unscathed. She thought about her grandfather, and she whispered his words into the cold, still air. "We find a way. We always find a way." The winter continued, harsh and unforgiving, but Emma and her team were ready. They had learned to adapt, to innovate, to trust in each other. They had proven that the spirit of the community garden was not dependent on fair weather or easy circumstances. It was built on a foundation of resilience, collaboration, and faith. And as Emma watched the first signs of spring begin to peek through the snow, she knew that the garden would bloom again, more beautiful than ever. The arrival of spring that year was greeted with a joy that bordered on relief. The snow melted, the ground thawed, and the first green shoots emerged from the soil, signaling the start of a new growing season. Emma walked through the fields every morning, her heart swelling with each new leaf, each new blossom, each sign of life returning to the land she loved. The community garden had become her life's work, her purpose, her passion, and she poured every ounce of her energy into its success. She had inherited the ability to inspire others, a gift that had come from her grandfather and been refined by her mother. She spoke at town meetings and community events, her voice calm and compelling, her words resonating with people who had grown weary of division and cynicism. She reminded them of what they could accomplish together, of the power of shared purpose and mutual support. She spoke about the history of the garden, about Ben Carter's struggle and Jesse Carter's leadership, about the generations of hard work that had created this oasis of abundance in the heart of the prairie. And she spoke about the future, about the possibilities that lay ahead if they continued to work together. Under Emma's leadership, the garden expanded in new directions. She launched a community-supported agriculture program, or CSA, where local families could purchase shares of the harvest in advance, ensuring a steady stream of income for the garden and a reliable supply of fresh produce for the community. The program was an immediate success, selling out within weeks of its announcement. Emma also established a partnership with the local school district, creating a farm-to-school program that brought fresh vegetables into the cafeteria and taught students about the importance of healthy eating and sustainable agriculture. The children loved the program, and Emma loved seeing their faces light up as they tasted a tomato they had grown themselves. The garden also became a gathering place for cultural events. Emma organized a summer concert series featuring local musicians and poets, and the events drew crowds from across the region. She hosted workshops on canning, preserving, and fermentation, teaching people how to make the most of their harvest. She created a children's garden, where kids could plant their own vegetables and learn about the miracle of growth. The garden was no longer just a source of food. It was a source of joy, of connection, of community pride. But Emma's work was not without its challenges. The agricultural industry was changing rapidly, with corporate consolidation and climate change creating pressures that threatened small-scale farmers. Emma was a vocal advocate for policies that supported sustainable farming and protected the rights of small farmers. She testified at state hearings, wrote opinion pieces for regional newspapers, and organized farmer protests against legislation that would have given undue advantage to agri-conglomerates. She was not afraid to speak truth to power, and her courage inspired others to do the same. The most important relationship in Emma's life during this time was with her brother Lucas, who had become her greatest ally and confidant. Lucas had stayed in Horace, running the family farm and managing the machine shop that had grown out of his childhood passion for tinkering. He was quiet and steady, a counterbalance to Emma's intensity, and his support was unwavering. They talked every day, sharing ideas and concerns, strategizing about the future of the garden and the farm. They were the last of the Carters, and they felt a profound responsibility to carry forward the legacy their grandfather and mother had built. Together, they launched a new initiative, the Carter Center for Sustainable Agriculture, a research and education center that would train the next generation of farmers and develop new techniques for regenerative farming. The center was funded by a combination of grants, donations, and proceeds from the garden, and it attracted attention from universities and agricultural organizations across the country. Emma was its director, and Lucas was its chief engineer, and together they created a hub of innovation that honored the past while embracing the future. Emma had always wanted a family of her own, but she had never found the time or the right person to share her life with. She had dated occasionally, but no one had been able to match the intensity of her commitment to the garden, the farm, the community. She sometimes wondered if she was making a mistake, if she was sacrificing personal happiness for professional fulfillment. But then she would walk through the garden, see the beauty of the vegetables, feel the gratitude of the people she served, and she knew that her choice was the right one. She was not alone. She had her brother, her staff, her community, and she had the legacy of her grandfather, a legacy of hope and resilience that had sustained her family through the darkest times. She was part of something larger than herself, and that gave her a sense of purpose and meaning that no romantic relationship could replace. The summer of Emma's 36th year was marked by a new and unexpected challenge: the arrival of a large-scale agri-corporation with ambitions to buy up land in the surrounding counties. The company, AgriCorp Global, was based in Chicago and had a reputation for aggressive expansion, using legal and financial pressure to push small farmers off their land and consolidate their holdings. Emma first learned of the threat when a neighbor, an elderly farmer named Harold, appeared at her door with a letter from AgriCorp's legal team. The letter offered a fair price for Harold's land, but also included a veiled threat. If he did not accept the offer, the company would use eminent domain and other legal maneuvers to force him out. Harold was terrified, his hands trembling as he handed the letter to Emma. He had farmed his land for 50 years, the same way his father and grandfather had. He had no desire to sell, but he was old and tired, and he did not think he had the strength to fight. Emma read the letter, her anger rising with each word. She knew this was not just a threat to Harold. It was a threat to the entire community, to the community garden, to everything her grandfather had fought for. She looked at Harold, her voice steady and firm. "We're not going to let them do this," she said. "We're going to fight, and we're going to win. You don't have to do this alone. We're all in this together." Emma called an emergency meeting, and the community responded with an outpouring of support. The garden staff, the volunteers, the local businesses, the church groups. Everyone came together, united in their determination to resist the corporate takeover. Emma organized a legal defense fund, raising thousands of dollars in a matter of days. She reached out to environmental organizations and agricultural advocacy groups, securing expert legal counsel and media attention. She launched a social media campaign, sharing Harold's story and the history of the community garden, and the campaign went viral, attracting support from across the country. The fight was not just about one farm. It was about the soul of the community, the right of ordinary people to determine their own destiny, the value of tradition and connection in a world that increasingly valued profit above all else. Emma found herself in the spotlight, a role she had not sought but was determined to fulfill. She did interviews with national news outlets, gave speeches at public hearings, and testified before a state legislative committee about the dangers of corporate consolidation in agriculture. She spoke with a passion and eloquence that astonished even her, drawing on the words and examples of her grandfather and mother. She told the story of Ben Carter, the man who had planted soybeans in September, who had refused to give up when the world told him he was a fool. She told the story of the community that had rallied around him, proving that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they stood together. The battle lasted for 18 months, a grueling and exhausting fight that tested Emma and the community in ways they had never imagined. AgriCorp used every legal tactic in its arsenal, filing lawsuits, pressuring officials, and offering ever higher sums of money to tempt Harold and other farmers to sell. But the community held firm, their solidarity unbroken. The Legal Defense Fund covered the costs of a talented attorney who exposed AgriCorp's shady practices and won several key rulings. The public pressure, amplified by the media campaign, forced the company to back down, at least for the time being. AgriCorp withdrew its offers, and Harold and his neighbors were able to keep their land. The victory was celebrated with a block party in the garden, and Emma stood at the center of it all, her heart full to bursting with gratitude and pride. Harold came up to her, his eyes wet with tears, and he clasped her hands in his gnarled, weather-beaten ones. "Thank you," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I couldn't have done this without you. You're your grandfather's granddaughter, through and through." Emma hugged him, feeling the weight of that compliment, the honor and responsibility of carrying her grandfather's legacy into a new era. She knew the fight was not over, that AgriCorp would likely return someday, and that there would be other challenges, other battles to fight. But she also knew that the community was stronger now, more united, more determined than ever to protect what they had built. And she knew that whatever came next, she would face it with the same stubborn, unyielding hope that had defined her grandfather's life and now defined her own. The Carter Center for Sustainable Agriculture had emerged as a powerful institution, not just a research facility, but a symbol of resistance and resilience. It had attracted grants, students, and attention from around the world, and its work had inspired other communities to organize and fight for their own futures. Emma had become a leader of national significance, but she never forgot her roots, never forgot the land and the people who had shaped her. She was a Carter, and Carters don't quit. She thought about that as she stood in the garden after the block party, watching the sun set over the prairie, and she felt a quiet, steady peace. The winter of Emma's 40th year brought a season of deep reflection and transformation. She had spent the past decade leading the community garden, fighting corporate threats, building the Carter Center, and becoming a national voice for sustainable agriculture. She had poured every ounce of her energy into the work, and she had achieved more than she had ever dreamed possible. But she had also neglected the quieter parts of life, the moments of stillness and connection that give meaning to all the striving. She had never married, never had children of her own, and as she entered her 40s, she began to wonder if she had made a mistake. Emma had always been close to her brother Lucas and his family. Lucas had married a local woman named Sarah, and they had 3 children, twins, Owen and Mia, who were now teenagers, and a younger daughter, Lily, who was 9. Emma adored her nieces and nephew, spending as much time with them as her busy schedule allowed. She taught them how to plant and harvest, how to identify birds and track the weather, how to listen to the quiet wisdom of the land. They were the closest thing she had to her own children, and she cherished them deeply. But as she watched them grow, she felt a pang of something that was hard to name. Regret, perhaps, or loneliness. She had given her life to the garden, and she was proud of what she had built, but she wondered if she had given up too much in the process. This sense of restlessness was compounded by a new challenge that had emerged in her work. The Carter Center had grown so large and influential that it had begun to attract the attention of corporate interests, not as adversaries this time, but as potential partners. Several large companies had approached Emma with offers of funding and collaboration, promising to support the center's work in exchange for access to its research and expertise. Emma was torn. She knew that the center needed financial stability, and that a partnership with a large corporation could provide the resources to expand and innovate. But she also knew that her grandfather and mother had fought against corporate consolidation, and she was wary of selling out the principles that had made the center what it was. She wrestled with the decision for months, talking it through with Lucas, her staff, and her advisors. There were heated debates, passionate arguments on both sides. Some argued that the partnership was a pragmatic necessity, a way to leverage corporate resources for the public good. Others argued that it was a betrayal of the center's mission, a surrender to the very forces that had threatened the community all those years ago. Emma felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her, the weight of her family's legacy, the weight of the community's trust in her. In the end, she made a compromise. She accepted a limited partnership with a single company, one that had a reputation for environmental responsibility and a genuine commitment to sustainable agriculture. The partnership provided funding for the center's research programs, but it came with strict safeguards, including independent oversight, transparent reporting, and a guaranteed right for the center to end the partnership at any time. It was not a perfect solution, but Emma believed it was the right one, a way to navigate the complexity of the modern world without abandoning the principles that mattered most. She presented her decision to the community at a town meeting, and it was met with a mixture of support and skepticism. Some applauded her pragmatism, while others expressed their fears that she was selling out. Emma listened to all of their concerns, her heart heavy with the weight of their expectations. She reminded them of her grandfather's words, the words that had guided the family through so many challenges. "We find a way. We always find a way." She said that this was her attempt to find a way, to balance the need for innovation with the need for integrity, to honor the past while building the future. It was not the end of the story, she said. It was a new chapter, one that would be written together by all of them. By the end of the meeting, the community had mostly accepted her decision. The partnership moved forward, and the Carter Center benefited from the new resources, expanding its research and education programs. Emma, too, found a new sense of peace. She had made a difficult choice, but she had made it with integrity, and she had the support of the people she loved and respected. She began to think more about her own life, about the possibility of finding a partner, of building a family of her own. It was not too late, she told herself. Her grandfather had found his purpose late in life, had rebuilt his farm and his community when all seemed lost. She could do the same, not just in her work, but in her personal life as well. She started to open herself to new connections, to allow herself to be vulnerable, to hope for something more than just the next harvest. It was a slow and difficult process, but she was determined to see it through. It was in the spring of her 42nd year that Emma Carter met the man who would change her life. His name was Daniel Reyes, and he was a soil scientist from New Mexico who had been invited to speak at the Carter Center's annual conference. Daniel was in his late 40s, tall and lean, with graying hair and warm, intelligent brown eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He had spent his career studying the relationship between soil health and climate change, and his research had taken him to farms across the Americas, from the highlands of Peru to the plains of the American Midwest. Emma was immediately struck by his quiet intensity, his deep knowledge, and his genuine humility. He did not talk down to people, did not lecture or preach. He listened with the same attention he gave to the soil, probing beneath the surface, looking for the truths that lay hidden. Their first conversation took place after his keynote speech in the garden's farmhouse kitchen, where Emma had invited him for a cup of coffee. They talked for hours, not about politics or business, but about the land, the seasons, the joy of watching a seed grow into a plant. Emma found herself opening up to him in ways she had not opened up to anyone in years. She told him about her grandfather, about the soybean story, about the legacy that had shaped her life. Daniel listened without judgment, his eyes full of understanding. He told her about his own journey, his own struggles and triumphs, the family he had lost, and the family he had built. He was a widower, he explained, his wife having died of cancer a decade ago. He had 2 grown children, a son in California and a daughter in Colorado, both of whom he was immensely proud of. He had spent the years since his wife's passing, immersing himself in his work, filling the emptiness with research and travel. But he had begun to feel in recent years that something was missing, that he was ready to open his heart to someone new. Emma felt a connection to Daniel that she had not felt with anyone before. It was not just physical attraction, though that was certainly there, but a deeper resonance, a meeting of minds and souls. They talked about the future, about what they wanted from life, about the possibility of building something together. Daniel told her that he had been offered a position at the University of Nebraska, a research position that would allow him to continue his work on soil health while being based in the state. He had not yet accepted, he said, because he wanted to see if there was a reason to stay. The implication was clear, and Emma felt her heart race. She told him that she would love to have him stay, that there was so much they could do together, both in their work and in their lives. It was a leap of faith, a leap she had not taken in years, but she was ready to take it. By the time the conference ended, Emma and Daniel had made a decision. He would accept the university position and move to Nebraska. They would see where things went, give themselves the time and space to build a relationship that could sustain them both. It was a beginning, uncertain but full of promise, and Emma felt a joy she had not felt in years. She called Lucas that evening, her voice trembling with excitement. "I think I met someone," she said. "I really think I did." Lucas laughed, a warm, knowing laugh. "It's about time, sis," he said. "It's about time." The months that followed were a period of discovery and growth. Daniel moved to Horace in the summer, renting a small house on the edge of town, close to the garden and the university. He and Emma spent their weekends exploring the prairie, hiking along the creek, and working side by side in the garden. He brought a new perspective to the Carter Center, his expertise in soil health complementing Emma's knowledge of sustainable farming practices. They collaborated on research projects, wrote papers together, and co-taught workshops on regenerative agriculture. It was a partnership that was both professional and personal, and it enriched every aspect of their lives. Emma found herself becoming softer, more open, more willing to let go of the control she had clung to for so long. She allowed Daniel to see her vulnerabilities, to comfort her when she was tired, to challenge her when she was stuck. He was patient and kind, a steady presence in the chaotic whirl of her life. He taught her to slow down, to savor the small moments, to appreciate the beauty of the present rather than always striving for the next goal. It was not always easy. They had their disagreements, their misunderstandings, their moments of frustration, but they worked through them together, building a foundation of trust and respect that grew stronger with each passing day. By the time their first anniversary approached, Emma realized that she had found something she had not even known she was looking for: a partner, a companion, a love that was both gentle and fierce. She thought about her grandparents, Ben and Ellen, and the love that had sustained them through so many years. She thought about her parents, Jesse and Mark, and the quiet, steady partnership they had built. And she felt a profound gratitude that she, too, had found that kind of love, that she was not destined to walk the path alone. The following summer, Emma and Daniel were married in the community garden, in the spot where her grandfather had planted his first row of soybeans. It was a small ceremony, attended by family and close friends, the kind of wedding that celebrated not just a union of two people, but a union of two lives, two histories, two dreams. Emma wore a simple white dress that had belonged to her mother, and Daniel wore a linen suit that he had bought at a thrift store in Santa Fe. The flowers were from the garden, a riot of color and fragrance that filled the air with the scent of summer. Lucas officiated, his voice steady and warm, his words full of love and pride. Emma's niece Mia was the maid of honor, and her nephews Owen and Lily were the flower girl and ring bearer. The sun was setting over the prairie, casting long golden shadows across the fields, and the guests, 100 of them, sat on hay bales arranged in a semicircle. Emma walked down the aisle on the arm of her brother, her eyes fixed on Daniel, who stood waiting for her with tears in his eyes. She felt the weight of her grandfather's presence, the sense that he was there, watching, smiling, proud. She thought about all the sacrifices she had made, all the struggles she had endured, all the obstacles she had overcome. She thought about the legacy of her family, the long line of Carters who had tilled this soil and built this community. And she felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that she was not just continuing that legacy, but adding to it. weaving her own story into the rich tapestry of the past. The ceremony was followed by a reception under the big cottonwood tree, where Ellen and Ben had shared their first kiss so many decades ago. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, joy and celebration. Emma and Daniel danced together under the stars, swaying to the sound of a local band that had come to honor them. It was a perfect evening, the kind that would be remembered for years to come, the kind that reinforced the bonds of family and community. That night, as they sat on the porch of the farmhouse, looking out at the fields bathed in moonlight, Daniel took Emma's hand and said, "I never thought I would find this. After my wife died, I thought I was done. I thought I would spend the rest of my life alone, buried in my research. But you changed everything. You reminded me that life is about more than just work, about more than just surviving. You taught me to hope again." Emma squeezed his hand, her heart full. "We taught each other," she said. "That's what love is, I think. Two people who help each other become the best versions of themselves." They sat in silence for a long time, just holding each other, watching the stars wheel across the sky. And Emma thought about her grandfather, the old farmer who had planted soybeans in September, who had refused to give up, who had built this beautiful, improbable world with nothing but stubborn hope. She was his granddaughter, his legacy, his living testament, and she was determined to honor him, not just by preserving what he had built, but by growing it, expanding it, sharing it with the world. The next morning, Emma and Daniel woke early and walked through the garden together, their hands clasped, their hearts full. The vegetables were thriving, the flowers were blooming, and the prairie stretched to the horizon in a vast, beautiful expanse of green and gold. Emma looked at Daniel and smiled, a smile that held all the hope and love and gratitude of a life well lived. "This is our home," she said. "This is our community, and we're going to take care of it, just like my grandfather did, just like my mother did, for as long as we live." Daniel nodded, his eyes shining. "Together," he said. "We'll do it together." And they did. They continued to lead the community garden, to expand the Carter Center, to fight for the rights of small farmers and the health of the soil. They worked side by side, their partnership a model of collaboration and mutual support. They also started a family of their own, a daughter named Ellen, after Emma's grandmother, and a son named Benjamin, after her grandfather. The children grew up surrounded by the land, learning the same lessons that had been passed down through generations. That hope was a seed that needed to be planted. That community was a bond that needed to be nurtured. That love was a force that could overcome any obstacle. By the time Emma's daughter Ellen was 10 and her son Benjamin was 8, the Carter family had become deeply woven into the fabric of the community in ways that Ben Carter, in his darkest hour, could never have imagined. The community garden had grown to encompass over 200 acres, making it one of the largest and most successful sustainable farming projects in the Midwest. The Carter Center had become a leading research institution, with partnerships with universities across the country and a reputation for innovative approaches to regenerative agriculture. The Farm to Table Cafe, now run by a third generation of the founding family, had earned a James Beard nomination. And the town of Horace, once a dying community on the brink of collapse, had become a destination for tourists and a model for rural revitalization. Emma and Daniel had built a life that honored the past while embracing the future, a life that was rich in purpose and meaning. But they never forgot the challenges that had shaped them, the struggles that had defined their family's journey. They told their children the story of Ben Carter every year on the anniversary of his first planting, taking them to the spot in the field where he had knelt down and pressed his hand into the soil. They told them about the storm, the drought, the miracle harvest, the community that had rallied around him. They told them about the love that had sustained the family through the darkest times, the love that had built this legacy of hope and resilience. Ellen was a bright, curious child, with her grandfather's stubborn streak and her great-grandmother's artistic sensibilities. She loved the garden, spending hours among the plants, sketching the flowers and cataloging the insects. She had decided, at the age of 8, that she wanted to be a botanist, and she had already begun to study the local flora with a passion that impressed her parents. Benjamin was quieter, more introspective, with his great-grandfather's love of machinery and his father's scientific mind. He could dismantle and reassemble a tractor engine by the time he was 7, and he spent his afternoons in the workshop with his great-uncle Lucas, learning the craft of engineering and design. The two children were inseparable, their bond forged in the soil of the garden and the love of their family. One evening, as Emma and Daniel sat on the porch watching the sunset, Ellen came running up with a sketchbook in her hands, her face alight with excitement. "Mom, look," she said, holding up the sketch. "I drew the garden from the top of the windmill. You can see all the rows, the greenhouses, the sunflower patch, everything." Emma took the sketch, her eyes filling with tears. It was beautiful, a bird's-eye view of the garden that captured its vibrant diversity, its careful order, its exuberant life. She saw her grandfather in that sketch, saw his vision, his hope, his relentless determination. She saw the community that had embraced his dream and made it their own. She saw the future, bright and full of promise. "It's perfect," Emma said. hugging her daughter tightly. "You've captured it all. You've captured our story." Ellen beamed, proud of her work, and she ran off to show the sketch to her father and brother. Emma watched her go, her heart full, and she thought about the long chain of women and men who had brought them to this moment. She thought about her great-grandmother Ellen, who had planted roses by the farmhouse and believed in her husband when no one else did. She thought about her grandmother Jessie, who had led the community through the drought and built on her father's legacy. She thought about her mother, the woman who had taught her to love the land and the people on it. And she thought about her own children, who would carry this legacy into the future, who would write their own chapters in the story of the Carter family and the community they had built. She felt a sense of peace, a sense of completion, a sense that her life had been a journey of purpose and meaning. She had not always been sure of the path, had not always known where it would lead, but she had trusted in the process, in the wisdom of her ancestors, in the power of hope and love. And she had arrived at a place of deep contentment, a place where the past and the future met in a beautiful, living present. The sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Emma took Daniel's hand, and they sat together in the quiet, their hearts full of gratitude. They had built something that would outlast them, something that would nourish the community for generations to come. They had honored the legacy of the past and created a foundation for the future. They had done what Ben Carter had done. They had planted a seed, tended it with love, and watched it grow into something far larger than they could have imagined. The years passed, as years always do, and the community of Horace continued to evolve and thrive. Emma and Daniel grew older, their hair streaked with silver, their faces lined with the marks of a life lived fully. They stepped back from the day-to-day management of the garden and the Carter Center, handing the leadership roles to a new generation of passionate, committed individuals. Emma's daughter, Ellen, had become a world-renowned botanist, her research on prairie ecosystems earning her accolades and honors. She had returned to Horace to run the community garden, just as her mother had done. And she had brought with her a new vision, a new energy, a new determination to build on the foundation her ancestors had laid. Ellen had also married a soil scientist named Maria, and they had adopted 2 children, a boy and a girl, who were the joy of their lives. Benjamin had become a leading engineer, specializing in sustainable farming equipment, and he had established a manufacturing facility in Horace, providing jobs and opportunities for the community. He was married to a local woman, Anna, and they had 3 children, all of whom were growing up surrounded by the land and the love of their extended family. The Carter Center had become an international institution, attracting students and researchers from around the world. Its work had influenced agricultural policies and practices on multiple continents, promoting regenerative farming and sustainable development. The community garden had become a model of ecological and social harmony, demonstrating that abundance and resilience were possible when people worked together in partnership with the land. Emma and Daniel lived in the farmhouse that had been in the Carter family for over 150 years. It had been renovated and modernized, but its soul remained intact. The creaky floors, the drafty windows, the porch that looked out over the fields. Emma spent her days tending her own small garden, reading and writing letters to friends and family. Daniel continued his research, publishing papers and mentoring young scientists. But he also found time for long walks along the creek and quiet evenings on the porch. They were content, at peace with the lives they had built and the legacy they had created. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Ellen came to visit with her children, Liam and Sophia. The children ran through the fields, their laughter echoing across the prairie, and Emma watched them with a smile. She thought about her own childhood, the summers she had spent running through these same fields, her mother's voice calling her in for dinner. She thought about her grandfather, the old farmer who had taught her so many lessons, who had shown her what it meant to be a Carter. And she thought about her grandchildren, the next generation, who would carry this legacy forward into a future that was full of possibility and uncertainty. Ellen sat down beside her mother, her hand resting on Emma's. "I was thinking about Grandpa Ben today," she said. "About his story, the soybeans, the storm, the harvest. It never gets old, does it? It always makes me tear up, no matter how many times I hear it." Emma nodded, her eyes glistening. "It's not just a story," she said. "It's a truth. It's a truth about hope, about community, about the power of never giving up. And it's a truth that we need to keep telling, keep sharing, keep passing down to the next generation." Ellen nodded, her own eyes full of emotion. "I've been thinking about starting a project," she said. "A storytelling initiative where we collect the stories of the community, the history of the garden, the memories of everyone who has been part of this journey. I want to preserve those stories, not just in books, but in recordings, videos, interactive exhibits. I want people to be able to walk through the garden and hear the voices of the people who built it, who believed in it, who loved it." Emma's heart swelled with pride. It was a beautiful idea, a perfect way to honor the legacy of the past while inspiring the future. "That's wonderful," she said, her voice full of warmth. "Your grandfather would be so proud." Ellen smiled, and she leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. They sat together in the quiet, watching the children play, feeling the deep, abiding connection that bound them together across the generations. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the sky erupted in a blaze of color. A final, glorious farewell to another day on the prairie. The storytelling initiative that Ellen had envisioned became one of the most ambitious and transformative projects in the history of the community garden. Over the course of 5 years, she and a team of volunteers conducted hundreds of interviews, capturing the voices and memories of everyone who had been part of the garden's journey, from the oldest residents of Horace, who remembered Ben Carter's struggle, to the youngest children, who were just beginning to understand the meaning of the legacy they had inherited. The project was called Seeds of Hope, and it was a multimedia archive that included recordings, photographs, videos, and written transcripts. It was housed in a new building, the Heritage Center, which had been constructed at the entrance to the garden. The center was designed to be an immersive experience, allowing visitors to walk through the history of the community, to see the faces and hear the voices of the people who had built this place. It was more than just a museum. It was a living, breathing tribute to the power of hope and the strength of community. Emma, now in her 70s, was the guest of honor at the opening ceremony of the Heritage Center. She stood on the platform, looking out at the crowd that had gathered to celebrate this achievement. There were hundreds of people there, families, friends, community members, dignitaries from across the country. It was a moment of profound significance, a testament to everything the community had accomplished. Emma spoke at the ceremony, her voice steady and clear, her words full of grace. She spoke about her grandfather, the old farmer who had planted soybeans in September. She spoke about her mother, the woman who had led the community through the drought. She spoke about her own journey, the struggles and triumphs that had shaped her life. She spoke about the legacy of the past and the promise of the future. And she reminded everyone that the story of Horace was not just about one family or one garden. It was about all of them, together, bound by a shared commitment to hope and community. "We are the heirs of a great legacy," Emma said, her voice rising with emotion. "But we are not just the heirs of the past. We are the architects of the future. We are the ones who will write the next chapters of this story. And I have every confidence that those chapters will be as beautiful, as inspiring, as the ones that have come before. Because we know in our hearts that hope is not passive. It is active, creative, and resilient. It is the seed that we plant every day in our work and in our lives." The crowd applauded, a wave of sound that echoed across the prairie, and Emma felt a surge of gratitude that almost overwhelmed her. She looked at Daniel, who was sitting in the front row, his eyes shining with pride. She looked at Ellen and Maria, their children by their sides. She looked at Benjamin and Anna, their young family gathered close. She looked at the people of Horace, the community that had embraced her family and made them their own. She felt a sense of completion, a sense that her life had come full circle. She had started as a young woman uncertain of her path, and she had ended as the matriarch of a community, a leader, a keeper of the legacy. She had honored her grandfather, her mother, her ancestors. She had built something that would outlast her, something that would continue to nurture the community for generations to come. As she walked off the stage, her son and daughter by her side, she remembered a line from her grandfather's book, the book that had inspired her in her darkest moments. "The soil does not remember the storms that passed over it. It only remembers the seeds that were planted." Emma smiled. She had planted her seeds with love and devotion, and she knew, with absolute certainty, that they would grow. In the years that followed the opening of the Heritage Center, Emma began to slow down, to enjoy the quiet pleasures of life that she had often neglected in her decades of striving. She spent more time with Daniel, taking long walks along the creek and watching the sunsets from the porch. She read voraciously, devouring books on history, philosophy, and the natural world. She wrote letters to friends, old and new, keeping in touch with the network of people she had met over the course of her remarkable life. She was content, at peace with the choices she had made and the path she had traveled. But she never stopped thinking about her grandfather, the man whose legacy had shaped her life. She often walked to the cottonwood tree, where he and Ellen were buried, and she would sit on the bench and talk to him. She told him about the Heritage Center, about the storytelling initiative, about the new generations of farmers who were carrying forward the work he had begun. She told him about her children and grandchildren, about the joy and pride they brought her. She told him about the challenges the community had faced and overcome, and she always ended with the same words. The words that had become a kind of prayer for her. "We found a way, Grandpa. We always find a way." She felt his presence in those moments, a warmth in the air, a peace in her heart. She knew that he was watching over her, watching over the community, watching over the legacy they had built together. And she knew that his spirit was still alive, still present, still inspiring people to plant seeds of hope. Emma's grandchildren, Liam and Sophia, had grown into young adults, and they had both decided to make Horace their home. Liam had become a teacher at the local high school, where he inspired a new generation of students to love the land and the community. Sophia had become a social worker, working with families in the region, helping them build the same kind of resilience that the Carter family had cultivated. They had both married, and there were already children on the horizon, great-grandchildren who would soon be running through the same fields that their ancestors had tilled. Emma would sit with Daniel in the evenings, watching their grandchildren and great-grandchildren play in the garden. and she would feel a joy so profound that it almost hurt. This was what her grandfather had fought for, not just survival, but abundance. Not just a harvest, but a community. Not just a legacy, but a future. The years continued to pass, as they always do, and Emma's hair turned white, and her movements became slower and more deliberate. She was still sharp, still engaged, still passionate about the work of the garden and the center, but she knew that her time was limited, that the season of her life was drawing to a close, and she accepted that with grace and gratitude. She had lived a good life, a meaningful life, a life that had been full of purpose and love. She had nothing to regret, nothing to fear. She was ready for whatever came next. On a warm June evening, the same kind of evening that her grandfather had chosen to leave the world, Emma Carter passed away in her sleep, her hand in Daniel's, her face serene and peaceful. The community mourned her loss, but they also celebrated her life, her achievements, and her love. She was buried beside her grandfather and her mother, under the cottonwood tree, where the wind sang through the leaves and the prairie stretched to the horizon. At her funeral, her daughter Ellen spoke the eulogy, her voice strong and clear, her words full of love and gratitude. "My mother taught me," Ellen said, "that hope is not a passive wish. It is an active commitment. It is the decision to plant, even when the soil is dry. It is the choice to continue, even when the storms come. It is the faith that the community, together, can overcome any challenge." She embodied that faith, just as her grandfather did, just as her mother did. And we, the people of Horace, will continue to embody it, in her honor, for all the generations to come. The crowd nodded, their hearts full, their determination renewed. The story of the Carter family was not ended. It was continuing, in the lives and hearts of everyone who had been touched by their legacy. The sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and a gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the cottonwood tree. And in that quiet, sacred moment, the spirit of the prairie seemed to whisper a promise that hope never dies, that community never breaks, and that the seeds of love, once planted, will always grow. And so the story of the Carter family and the community of Horace continued, weaving through the generations like the roots of the prairie grass that held the soil together. The community garden remained a vibrant, living testament to the power of hope and the strength of collaboration. The Carter Center continued to lead the way in sustainable agriculture, its research influencing policies and practices on multiple continents. The Heritage Center drew visitors from around the world, inspiring them with the story of a community that had refused to give up. And the people of Horace, bound by their shared history and their common purpose, continued to face the challenges of the future with courage and resilience. Ellen Carter, now in her 50s, had become a beloved leader in her own right. She had built on the foundation of her mother and her grandfather, expanding the garden and the center in ways that honored their vision while embracing the innovations of the new century. She had also written a new book, Roots of Resilience, which traced the history of the Carter family and the community garden from its beginnings to the present day. The book was a bestseller, praised for its insights into sustainable agriculture and community development, and it became a staple of classrooms and community organizations across the country. Ellen's children, Liam and Sophia, had grown up and had children of their own, the fifth generation of Carters to call Horace home. They were being raised with the same values, the same traditions, the same deep love of the land. They were learning the stories of their ancestors, understanding the sacrifices and struggles that had made their lives possible. And they were beginning to forge their own paths, their own contributions, their own chapters in the story of the community. One of Ellen's grandchildren, a young girl named Anna, had a particular affinity for the garden. She would spend hours among the plants, talking to them, singing to them, watching them grow. She had her great-great-grandfather's stubborn spirit and her grandmother's love of nature, and everyone who saw her in the garden felt a sense of hope, a sense of continuity, a sense that the legacy was in good hands. The seasons continued to turn, each one bringing new challenges and new opportunities. There were droughts and storms, economic recessions, and political upheavals. But the community of Horace faced them all together, drawing on the strength of their bonds and the wisdom of their ancestors. They knew that the path forward would not always be easy, that the storms would continue to come. But they also knew that they would find a way, as they always had, because they were a community of hope, a community of resilience, a community of love. Emma and Daniel had passed away, but their spirits were still present in the garden, in the wind, in the laughter of the children. Ben Carter, the old farmer who had planted soybeans in September, had passed away long ago, but his stubborn hope still lived in every seed that was planted, every harvest that was gathered, every meal that was shared. The story of the Carter family was a story of America itself, a story of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, of communities coming together in the face of adversity, of the unbreakable human spirit that refuses to give up. It was a story that would be told and retold, passed down from generation to generation, as long as there were fields to plant, seeds to sow, and hope to nurture. The sun set over the prairie, painting the sky in its familiar, beautiful hues, and the winds swept across the fields, carrying the scent of the earth and the promise of the future. The community of Horace slept under the stars, but their dreams were filled with the hope of tomorrow, and the story of Ben Carter and the land he loved lived on. The end. But in truth, the story never ended. The prairie was a vast and eternal place, a land of beginnings and continuations, where every ending was also a beginning. The fields that Ben Carter had once plowed with his own hands were now tended by machines, but the care and love with which they were tended had not changed. The community garden had become a model of sustainable abundance, a testament to what could be accomplished when people worked together. And the Carters, the descendants of the stubborn old farmer who had refused to give up, continued to play a central role in the life of the community. One of the most exciting developments in the community was the creation of a new initiative, the Carter Fellowship Program, which brought young farmers and activists from around the world to Horace for a year of immersive training in sustainable agriculture and community development. The program was highly competitive, attracting hundreds of applicants from dozens of countries. The fellows worked alongside the community members, learning the skills and values that had been passed down through generations. They left transformed, carrying the spirit of Horace back to their own communities, spreading the seeds of hope across the globe. Ellen's daughter, Sophia, had become the director of the fellowship program, and she approached her work with the same passion and commitment that had defined her ancestors. She believed deeply in the power of education and cultural exchange to build a better world. She saw the fellows as ambassadors of hope, the next generation of leaders who would carry the message of sustainability and collaboration to every corner of the planet. One of the fellows, a young woman from Colombia named Lucia, had been particularly inspired by her time in Horace. She returned to her homeland and founded a community garden project in a rural region that had been devastated by environmental degradation and economic hardship. Using the techniques she had learned in Horace, she transformed barren land into a thriving source of food and hope. The project became a model for other communities in the region, and Lucia was hailed as a visionary leader. Ellen's son, Liam, had continued his work as an educator, but he had also become an advocate for policy changes that supported sustainable agriculture and rural development. He testified at congressional hearings, wrote op-eds for national newspapers, and collaborated with advocacy organizations to push for reforms that would make it easier for small farmers to compete with agri-corporations. He was inspired by the example of his great-grandfather, who had faced powerful forces but had refused to be intimidated. He believed that the legacy of Ben Carter could continue to influence policy, even on a national level. The Heritage Center had expanded, adding new exhibits and interactive displays that traced the history of the community and its impact on the broader world. It had become a destination for school groups, researchers, and tourists, and its message of hope and resilience had resonated with people from all walks of life. Visitors often wrote in the guest books, expressing their gratitude for the inspiration and hope they had found there. Many of them returned to their own communities with renewed determination to make a difference. And at the heart of it all, there was still the community garden, a living, breathing expression of the values that had built it. Every season, new crops were planted, new friendships were forged, new memories were created. The garden was a constant reminder of the beauty and bounty that could emerge when people committed themselves to hope and worked together in partnership with the land. The descendants of Ben Carter continued to tell his story, to honor his memory, to build on the foundation he had laid, and the story continued to evolve, to grow, to adapt to the changing times. It was a story of resilience and renewal, a story of community and connection, a story of the unbreakable human spirit. The prairie stretched under the vast blue sky, and the wind carried the seeds of hope to every corner of the world. And somewhere, in the quiet, gentle presence of the land, Ben Carter and Emma Carter and all the generations before them watched over their descendants, their hearts full of pride and gratitude. They had planted their seeds, and those seeds had grown into a forest of hope that would shelter the community for all the time to come. The story was not over. It would never be over. And so, as the seasons continued their eternal cycle, spring's tender green, summer's golden abundance, autumn's rich harvest, and winter's quiet rest, the spirit of Ben Carter's legacy lived on in the daily rhythms of life in Horace. The community, now thriving and vibrant, stood as a lasting monument to what could be built when people refused to surrender to cynicism or despair. The garden was no longer just a garden. It was a sanctuary, a classroom, a gathering place, and a living chronicle of the American heartland's resilience. Young families moved to Horace to be part of this remarkable community, drawn by its reputation for innovation and its deep sense of belonging. They arrived with their dreams and their hopes, eager to contribute to a place that had proven, time and again, that hope could be cultivated like a crop. They built new homes, started new businesses, and brought new energy to the town. The schools were full, the streets were busy, and the community garden was always bustling with activity. The older generations, the ones who had lived through the lean years and the fights, looked upon this new vitality with a mixture of wonder and gratitude. They had never imagined that Horace would become a destination, a beacon of hope for others. But here it was, a testament to the power of believing in something larger than oneself, a testament to the courage of a single farmer who had refused to give up. The Carter family remained deeply connected to the garden and to the community, though they had begun to step back from leadership roles, allowing new voices and new ideas to flourish. Ellen and her siblings, now well into their later years, were happy to serve as advisors and mentors, sharing their wisdom and experience with the younger generation. They could often be found in the garden, their hands deep in the soil, their faces lit with the joy of doing the work they loved. Their children and grandchildren were the ones now leading the charge, infused with the same passion and commitment that had driven their ancestors. They embraced new technologies and techniques, while respecting the traditional knowledge that had been passed down. They engaged with the global community, sharing Horace's successes and learning from others. They were the new stewards of the legacy, and they honored that legacy with every action and decision. As the world around them grew more complex, more fragmented, and more uncertain, the community of Horace served as a reminder that the values of community, of hope, and of steadfast determination were not relics of the past. They were, in fact, more necessary than ever. The Carters and their neighbors had proven that these values could be a bulwark against despair, that they could provide a foundation for a better future. The garden itself was a testament to this. It was not just a source of food, but a source of meaning. It was a place where people came together to work, to learn, to heal, and to celebrate. It was a place where the boundaries between generations, between backgrounds, between different walks of life, seemed to disappear. In the garden, everyone was united by a common purpose: to nurture the land and to nurture each other. The lessons of Ben Carter, the importance of resilience, the power of community, the necessity of hope, had become woven into the very fabric of the community. They were not just stories. They were principles, values, and ways of being. They had shaped the history of the community, and they would continue to shape its future. The sun still set over the prairie, casting its long golden shadows across the fields. The wind still swept over the grasses, whispering its eternal secrets. And in Horace, Nebraska, a small town that had once been on the verge of extinction, hope was not just alive, it was flourishing. It was a home where people took care of each other, where they believed in each other, where they built a future together. And it would continue to endure as long as there were people willing to plant seeds of hope. In the end, the story of the Carter family and the community of Horace became a story that belonged not just to the people who lived there, but to everyone who had ever heard it. It became a metaphor for the strength of the human spirit, a parable about what it meant to be a community, a reminder that hope was not passive, but active, a seed that had to be planted in the soil of everyday life, nurtured by love, watered by perseverance, and tended with the care of neighbors who believed in each other. When people visited Horace, they came away transformed. They carried the story with them, back to their homes and their communities. They shared it around dinner tables and in classrooms, in community meetings and on social media. It spread far and wide, inspiring others to take action, to believe in the power of collective effort, to refuse to give up on their own dreams and their own communities. The words of Ben Carter, spoken in a dusty field so many years ago, had become a rallying cry for people across the globe. We find a way. We always find a way. It was a simple phrase, but it was one that had the power to move mountains. It was a reminder that, no matter how difficult the circumstances, no matter how long the odds, the human spirit could prevail. Ellen's grandchild, Anna, the young girl who had always loved the garden, had grown into a remarkable young woman. She had followed in the footsteps of her great-grandmother Emma, becoming a passionate advocate for sustainable agriculture and community development. She spoke at conferences, wrote articles for influential publications, and worked tirelessly to ensure that the lessons of her family's history were shared with the world. She, like her ancestors, was a bearer of hope, a keeper of the legacy. One evening, as Anna sat on the porch of the farmhouse, looking out at the fields that had sustained her family for generations, she felt a profound sense of peace. She knew that her family's story was part of a much larger story, a story of humanity's struggle to overcome, to build, to connect. She knew that she was just one link in a long chain, but she also knew that every link mattered. She thought about her great-great-grandfather, the old farmer who had planted soybeans in September. She imagined him, alone in the field, his hands in the dirt, his face to the sky, refusing to give up. She felt a connection to him that was not just blood, but spirit, a shared belief in the possibility of a better world. She rose from the porch and walked out into the garden, the moonlight bathing the plants in silver. She knelt down and pressed her hand into the soil, just as Ben Carter had done so many years ago. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for never giving up. Thank you for planting the seeds. Thank you for showing us what is possible." The wind stirred the leaves, and Anna imagined she heard a voice, familiar and dear, whispering back, "Plant your own seeds now. The soil is ready. The hope is yours." Anna smiled, her heart full. She knew that she had a purpose, a calling, a legacy to carry forward, and she was ready to do it. Not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. She was a Carter, a descendant of a long line of stubborn dreamers, and she would never give up. The story of Horace, the story of hope, the story of America, would continue through her and through all those who would come after. The prairie stretched out before her, vast and beautiful, full of promise. And Anna Carter stood at its edge, ready to begin. The end. Anna Carter was 27 years old when she stood at the edge of the 40-acre field that had started it all. The same field where her great-great-grandfather Ben had knelt in the dust and pressed his hand into the earth, praying for a miracle that had seemed impossible. The sun was setting behind her, painting the prairie in shades of amber and rose, and the wind carried the familiar scent of dry grass and rich soil. The scent of home, of legacy, of a story that had been written across 5 generations. She had returned to Horace after 3 years away, working with sustainable agriculture projects in sub-Saharan Africa, and the homecoming had hit her harder than she had expected. The farmhouse looked the same, its white clapboard gleaming in the fading light, the rose bushes still blooming along the porch, the old cottonwood trees still standing sentinel over the graves of her ancestors. But Anna was not the same. She had seen poverty and abundance, despair and hope, in equal measure. She had worked alongside farmers who had nothing but their hands and their faith, and she had witnessed the transformative power of community in places where the soil was thin and the odds were long. She had carried the story of Horace with her, sharing it with villagers in Tanzania, with cooperative farmers in Kenya, with women's collectives in Ghana. And everywhere she went, the story had resonated. Not because it was unique, but because it was universal. It was the story of people who refused to give up, who found a way when there seemed to be no way, who planted seeds of hope in the most unlikely soil. Now she was home, and she felt the weight of that story pressing on her shoulders, not as a burden, but as a call. She had been asked to take over the directorship of the Carter Center, following in the footsteps of her grandmother Ellen, her great-aunt Emma, and her great-great-grandfather Ben. It was a position of immense responsibility, one that would require her to balance tradition and innovation, to honor the past while building the future. She had said yes because she knew, deep in her soul, that this was her path, her purpose, her place in the long, unbroken chain of Carters who had tended this land. But she had also said yes because she had seen, in her travels, that the work of the Carter Center was more important than ever. Climate change was reshaping agriculture. Corporate consolidation was threatening small farmers, and rural communities across the globe were struggling to survive. The lessons of Horace, community, resilience, sustainability, were not just historical artifacts. They were urgently needed strategies for survival. Anna walked the rows of the community garden, her hands brushing against the leaves of the tomato plants, the beans, the squash. The garden was thriving, as it always did, a testament to the generations of care that had been poured into it. She stopped at the spot where her great-great-grandfather had planted his first row of soybeans, and she knelt down, just as he had done, pressing her palm into the earth. She closed her eyes and felt the cool, crumbly texture of the soil, and she imagined his voice, gruff and tender, speaking to her across the years. "You can do this," he seemed to say. "You're a Carter, and Carters don't quit." She opened her eyes, a smile on her face, and she felt a surge of determination that banished every doubt. She had inherited her family's stubborn streak, their refusal to back down, their unshakable faith in the power of hope. And she was going to use that inheritance to build something even greater than what had come before, a center that would not just serve the community of Horace, but would serve the world. The next morning, Anna convened a meeting of the Carter Center's board of directors, a group of 15 men and women who represented the diverse interests of the community. She laid out her vision with clarity and passion. The center would expand its research programs, focusing on climate-resilient crops and regenerative farming techniques. It would launch a global fellowship program, bringing farmers and activists from around the world to Horace for immersive training. It would partner with universities and NGOs to develop scalable solutions to the challenges facing small-scale agriculture. And it would continue to be a voice for hope, a reminder that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they worked together. The board was skeptical at first, as boards often are. They worried about the cost, the complexity, the risk of failure. But Anna had learned, from her grandmother and her great-aunt, how to listen and how to persuade. She addressed each concern with patience and evidence, sharing stories from her travels, data from successful projects, and the unwavering conviction that the work was not just possible, but necessary. By the end of the meeting, she had won them over. The expansion was approved, and the work began. The months that followed were the most challenging of Anna's life. She traveled constantly, building partnerships and securing funding. She worked alongside the staff, late into the night, refining the details of the programs. She faced setbacks and disappointments, moments when the vision seemed too ambitious, the obstacles too great. But she also experienced moments of profound joy. The first cohort of global fellows arriving at the center, their faces alight with curiosity and hope. The first harvest of the new climate-resilient crops, a success that exceeded all expectations. The first research paper published in a prestigious journal, putting Horace on the map as a center of agricultural innovation. Through it all, she drew strength from the knowledge that she was not alone. Her family was with her. Her grandmother Ellen, now in her 80s, but still sharp and wise. Her great-aunt Emma, whose spirit seemed to infuse every corner of the garden. Her ancestors, Ben and Jesse, whose graves she visited every Sunday, sharing her triumphs and her struggles. And she drew strength from the community itself, the people of Horace who had embraced her family's legacy and made it their own. They showed up for work parties and fundraisers. They offered encouragement and advice. They reminded her that the Carter Center was not just her project, it was their project, their hope, their future. One evening, as the sun set over the prairie and the wind whispered through the cottonwood tree, Anna sat on the porch of the farmhouse and looked out at the fields she had known since childhood. She thought about her great-great-grandfather, standing in the same spot, facing his own impossible odds. She thought about the storm that had destroyed his first crop, the drought that had tested his resolve, the community that had rallied around him. She thought about the long line of women and men who had carried his story forward, each adding their own chapter, their own contribution. And she thought about her own chapter, just beginning, full of promise and possibility. She pulled out her journal, the one she had kept since she was a little girl, and she wrote the words that had been forming in her heart. We are the heirs of a great legacy, but we are also its authors. The story is not finished. It continues with every seed we plant, every connection we build, every act of faith we perform. This is my promise to my ancestors and to my descendants. I will carry the story forward. I will plant the seeds of hope wherever the soil is ready, and I will never, ever give up. She closed the journal and looked up at the stars, scattered across the vast, dark sky like seeds of light. And she felt, with absolute certainty, that her great-great-grandfather was smiling down on her, proud of the woman she had become, proud of the work she was doing, proud of the story she was writing. The wind stirred the leaves of the cottonwood tree, and Anna heard it again, the voice that had guided her ancestors through so many storms. Find a way. Always find a way. And she smiled, because she knew, with her whole heart, that she would. The story of Horace, the story of hope, the story of America, would continue through her, and through all those who would come after, carrying the seeds of resilience into an uncertain but beautiful future.